Soundscape horror. The Legal Alchemist by Richard L. Elsliger. People called him a snake, a shark, and a scumbag, and those were his friends. Stuart Gooding had practiced law for a very long time, and many considered him the best, though his contemporaries raged against his incessant victories, failing to comprehend how one lawyer could singularly be so lucky. The fact of the matter is that Stuart Gooding won every case he ever accepted from the inception of his career. When he graduated from law school, Stuart wasted not a moment of time finding a mentor to give him the practical training that so many law schools failed to contemplate, and he found that mentorship in Reginald Hall, the meanest junkyard dog of the courts, striking fear into the hearts of lesser attorneys, of which there were more than celestial bodies in the heavens. Reginald Hall took Stuart under his tutelage, seeing an equally cruel streak in his prodigy. It merely took some coaxing to bring the malice to the surface. Mr. Hall saw that malice during one particularly brutal cross-examination of a defendant on the stand. The defendant had filed a countersuit for personal injuries arising out of the original plaintiff's case filed by Mr. Hall. When it came to cross-examine the defendant, Mr. Hall gave the floor to his second-chair prodigy, and Stuart did not disappoint. The defendant, during direct examination by her attorney on the countersuit, had unwittingly demonstrated a full range of motion when asked to show the jury her difficulties encountered while swimming. The poor plaintiff prattled on about her intense pain and showed her limited range of arm motion caused by the car accident. Stuart Gooding picked up on the unintended demonstration of pre-accident and post-accident movements after her lawyer goaded her into doing a simulated backstroke with her arms. At the end of her lawyer's direct examination, Mr. Hall told his associate in subtle breaths to go get her, and he did. "Now, Miss Piper, earlier you mentioned your problems with swimming, correct?" "Yes," she answered. "And would you mind demonstrating the difficulties you encountered when you attempted to swim after the accident?" Miss Piper began to feign a half-hearted swimming motion, guarding her arm and hand close to her body in the most awkward of swimming techniques. "Now, Miss Piper, can you demonstrate how you normally swam before your accident?" The witness, without hesitation, began sweeping her arm like a fast-rotating windmill, unimpeded by her limited range of motion from moments before. Stuart snapped at her in mid-rotation of her arm and said, "You're not having a problem now, are you, Miss Piper?" A dumbstruck look of terror formed in her face, and she pulled her hand close to her body and froze. "No," she said, averting her eyes from the jury, where all eyes of judgment converged upon her pathetic effort to perpetrate her fraud. A few of the jurors laughed. "No further questions," said Gooding, and took his seat at counsel's table. Ms. Piper's attorney sat at his own counsel's table, hands folded and eyes cast to the floor. "Well, counsel, do you have any redirect?" asked the judge of Ms. Piper's attorney. Her counsel took a deep and laborious breath. "No, Your Honor." "You may step down," said the judge to the witness. The jury deliberated for 20 minutes before delivering a defense verdict on Ms. Piper's counterclaim. On the plaintiff's case, the jury delivered a devastating verdict of $500,000 against the defendant, the full amount asked by Reginald Hall in his closing argument. Mr. Hall doubled over in pain at the counsel's table when the verdict was read in open court. He fell to the floor with a radical thud and lay there, motionless. Stuart had a bad feeling, a very bad feeling indeed, about the condition of his mentor. The deputies flocked to Reginald Hall in his last moments of life, attempting CPR to no avail. Reginald Hall was dead, his practice dying with him, leaving his inexperienced protege, Stuart Gooding, to pick up the pieces. Reginald Hall had no family, and not surprisingly, he had no friends. He did, however, have a succession plan in place, and that included his legal prodigy, Stuart Gooding. The agreement read that in the event of his untimely death, his associate, Stuart Gooding, was to assume control of the practice. A will was provided whereby Mr. Hall devised and bequeathed all of his worldly goods to Stuart, including the land and the building upon which his practice had been built decades before. Stuart accepted the terms of the will in a state of shock, mixed with a modicum of euphoria at the head start given to him by his mentor in the most unexpected turn of events. The funeral and burial of Reginald Hall took place on a rainy autumn afternoon under a pall of gloom. No one showed to the funeral, though the local bar association had advertised the time and place of viewing and burial. Word traveled fast through the legal community, and all were fully aware that the old crow had finally cashed in his chips at the council table. Word spread fast in superstitious whisperings that the court where he died was now cursed and likely haunted by his rancid soul. On Sunday, after the Saturday burial, Stewart found himself back at the office, going through Mr. Hall's personal effects at his desk. He came across an envelope stuffed hastily in the top desk drawer. The letter was addressed personal and confidential, for Stewart Gooding's eyes only, scrawled in his mentor's handwriting. Stewart opened the envelope with shaky hands, fearful of the revelation contained therein. He flipped open the envelope and removed the letter. Dear Stewart, I write these words to you with some hesitation, but I know that you will pick up where I left off. I have many enemies that I accumulated through the practice of law, but not by intention, but through jealousy of my success. I have a secret to my practice that no one can figure out. No one knows how I managed to win every case I ever accepted, but I know. Now is the time that you know. I believe that when you read these words, I will have passed on to the great beyond. It's okay. I chose you as my special project because I saw in you the attitude and drive that I once had in my earlier years. I will be brief as possible, as brief as any lawyer can be. In my office, hidden within an old book of case law reporters, you will find a topaz crystal. This is no ordinary crystal, but is possessed of extraordinary powers. It was given to me by a dying lawyer who also happened to be my mentor, as I was once yours. Use this crystal. Stare into it before you meet with any potential client, and you will see the outcome of their case before you even accept the representation. That is the sum total of my secret. That crystal defined my success, and my success defined my life. The crystal will also define your success if you decide to use it. But there is a trade-off. What the crystal gives in one way, it takes in another. Each time you use the power, you sacrifice your health, and therefore remove time from your life clock. Essentially, you are making the choice of wealth over health. None of us live forever, so I made my choice, and now the time has come for you to make yours. I suggest you use the crystal wisely, and you will never want for anything in your life, though it might be shorter, given the power of the crystal both to reward and to take away. A short life, but brilliant life, is better than 100 years of mediocrity. I remain faithfully yours, my apprentice, Reginald Hall. Stewart stood up like an uncoiled spring and pushed away from the chair. He pulled books from the shelves behind the desk, flipping pages open and casting them to the floor in a frantic search for the crystal. He didn't want to believe in the crystal. He wanted to believe the letter to be the ranting of a sick and dying man, but he needed to find that crystal. In a New York minute, he'd already removed nearly 100 volumes from the bookcase, finding nothing. Damn it, where the hell was it? He paused and looked at the bottom shelf way off in a corner. A disused and dusty reporter concealed beyond the scope of overhead lights tempted Stewart to pull it from its slumber. He reached down and a huge spider rushed to his hand, its small but visible fangs raised and pointed. Stewart pulled his fingers away moments before it could puncture his hand with a painful bite. Stewart opened the desk drawer and removed a ruler. He jammed the ruler into the bookcase and pried the spider from its sentry duty, slapping it to the floor where he crushed it beneath his malevolent shoe. He removed the volume and opened the book to a false compartment. There he found a crystal, a caramel-colored translucent rock that fit his palm. He picked it out from the book and held it to the overhead lights of the office. It reflected pale yellow light to him, but transmitted none of the claimed images asserted by his mentor. Stewart appreciated the presence of an inexplicable energy emanating from the crystal, such energy demanding he hold on to it and not let go. The nebulous crystal bestowed an infectious power that penetrated Stewart's thought, making him lightheaded. He had to sit down and fell back into Reginald Hall's old leather high-back chair, holding the crystal and watching the room spin. He slipped away into a dream, a flight into his future toward the life that might be, the wins, the congratulatory handshakes from elated clients, the cocktail parties, and the notoriety. His grip on the crystal loosened and it fell to the desk. Stuart Gooding's body shook and his eyes snapped open. He scooped up the crystal and clutched it in his hand again. "So you're the reason for the winds," he said, holding up the topaz to the artificial light. He turned and angled the crystal to appreciate its amber-like properties, still searching for any hint of future forecasts. Seeing no indications of any purported supernatural properties, he stuffed the crystal in his lawyer's bag and left the office. As is the life of any lawyer, work commenced early on Monday morning, with only a hiatus long enough to eat dinner and get a night's sleep before returning to the grind. Reginald Hall's reputation preceded him, and already Stuart had 2 appointments scheduled for Monday afternoon, in close succession to his mentor's fresh burial. Stuart fiddled with paperwork and general filing duties, cleaning up loose ends throughout the office. The morning blazed past, and he ate lunch at Mr. Hall's desk, now his desk. Stuart wondered why Reginald Hall never hired additional support staff, but today he had his answer in the crystal. Stuart removed the topaz from his suit pocket and gazed at it while eating a sandwich he made from leftovers last night. If the crystal worked as Mr. Hall represented in his testimonial, never more would Stuart Gooding be relegated to eating table scraps. He would eat the finest food and have it specially prepared by the best chefs. He rubbed the topaz in his hand, cherishing its beauty and its simplicity. The doorbell chime alerted him to the first client appointment, and he wiped his mouth with a paper napkin. He put a hand through his hair and donned his suit coat, removing it from the back of the chair, and straightened his tie. "Be there in a minute," he said. "Okay," responded a voice in the waiting area. Stuart stepped out to greet the initial consult, an older woman with a cast on her right arm. "Stuart Gooding, pleased to meet you." "Mary Sperling," said the putative client. "Well, I'd shake your hand, but it looks like you had an unfortunate fall, judging by the cast on your wrist." "I sure did," she said. "I'm a musician, and I'm hoping you can help me." "Follow me," said Stuart, and directed her to his office. She sat in the client's chair, and he assumed the high back seat of his former boss. She explained the circumstances of her fall, and Stuart undertook a legal analysis of the facts, advising about defective conditions and the need for the landowner to have notice of the condition in order to find liability. He gave her caveats that fall-down cases were extremely difficult to prove, and she advised that she understood. At that point, Stuart excused himself and retreated to the back of the office under the pretext of needing a retainer agreement should he decide to take her case. In the back room, he removed the crystal and held it up to the light. A mild current ran through the topaz, and Stuart stared deeply into the dark, watery opacity of the crystal. He saw the case outcome, a brief flash within the hardened stone, a large number appearing on the verdict form at the end of a trial. He saw his client hug him at counsel's table. Stuart wanted to disbelieve, but his eyes accepted the projection as an undeniable truth. He must take this case. He removed a retainer from the drawer and brought it to the client. "I believe we have a case," he said, and handed her the retainer for her review and consideration. "Thank you," said the putative client, and she reviewed the contingency fee arrangement. She scanned the document, and Stuart handed her his pen. She signed without hesitation. "I am sorry for what happened to Mr. Hall," she said. "Yes, it was a shock to us all, but he entrusted me to pick up his practice, and I aim to keep his string of victories alive through me." "Thank you again," she said. "I'm looking forward to work with you, Mr. Gooding." "Yes, indeed," said Stuart. "We're going to get a great result for your broken wrist. I can feel it." Stuart smiled and escorted Miss Sperling to the front door. "I will be in touch," said Stuart. He saw the next consult already parking their car in the firm's lot, reminding Stuart that Reginald Hall's litigation conveyor belt was still very much running like clockwork, even in death. The second consultation passed Miss Sperling, and she gave him a reassuring nod. The man came through the door on crutches, and Stuart accommodated him as best he could, arranging a chair in the waiting room. "Mr. Fields, I presume?" "Yes, I'm a little bit early," he said. "That's no problem. Can I get you some coffee?" asked Stuart. "Yes, please, and thank you." Stuart retreated to his office, removed the crystal, and peered into its liquidy amber depths. The topaz hummed and vibrated. Stuart saw himself seated at counsel's table next to Mr. Fields with a look of dismay when the jury mouthed the verdict to the court. He He went to the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee for Mr. Fields and brought him into the office. Mr. Fields went on about his injuries from a fall at the hospital, breaking his ankle, sustaining a bimalleolar fracture. He claimed that he might have slipped on a substance, but he wasn't sure if that caused the fall. He could not describe the substance with any detail on its composition, nor could he state how the substance ended up in the location of his fall or how long it had been there. Stewart feigned interest, but explained away the merits of the case, indicating that there would be notice issues, and unless Mr. Fields could describe what caused the fall and how long the substance had been there, the case would be extremely weak and likely to be subject to a motion to dismiss. Even if the case survived, it likely would be subject to a directed verdict in favor of the defendant hospital at trial. Stewart respectfully declined the representation, telling the man that there still may be a case, but it was not a representation that he wished to undertake. Stewart emphasized to Mr. Fields to be aware of the statute of limitations and seek out another legal opinion immediately. Over the first year of Stewart's fledgling practice, he signed up many cases and rejected many more. The money flew through the doors by way of settlements with insurance carriers and then by way of trial. The Sperling trial began 2 years after he signed up the case. Trial tactics used by the other side were brutal and deceptive, but they were not enough to outmaneuver the brazen and confident Mr. Stewart Gooding, who by now had gained a reputation in the local legal community that caused whisperings among the defense bar that he'd assumed the mantle of Reginald Hall. Insurance companies and civil defense attorneys alike grew to fear the sight of Gooding's name on a pleading, because when they saw that name, they knew they were in for a beating in court. With each win, the money flowed like a smelted river of gold, but with each success, as promised by his mentor, Stewart became more sickly, with aches and pains that his doctors were incapable of diagnosing. Over the years, Stewart developed a habit for fast cars and faster women, each costing him considerably, which perpetuated the need to continue bringing in the winning cases to quench his insatiable spending habits. He had them all, blondes, brunettes, and redheads, sprinkled amidst a massive collection of vintage race cars and modern carbon fiber supercars. Stewart thought nothing of outbidding the highest bidders at collector car auctions, obtaining one-of-one examples of the rarest cars, Mercedes Roadsters, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Porsches. He amassed one of the largest car collections around, stored deep underground in a massive garage of cobblestone and brick, with a custom-built French cafe, street lights and all, incorporated into the ambience, reminiscent of a Parisian boulevard by twilight. The victories that supported his lifestyle were not kind to him. In his weakened medical condition, he needed help. The time had come to find an apprentice he could mentor along the way. He found that apprentice in Norma Keeling. She graduated the top of her class and demonstrated a savagery he'd rarely seen in anyone but himself, and vaguely reminiscent of his long-departed mentor. Stewart knew his time was drawing near, and he made a succession plan to which she agreed over a lavish dinner at the finest downtown restaurant he could select. It was during the jury's return of their verdict on a case he'd been working up for 3 years, when Stewart felt a flutter in his chest. He looked to his protege in a silent plea for help. Norma Keeling stared ahead at the jury, stone-faced, unaware of the medical emergency unfolding right next to her. The verdict was read, judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5 million. Stewart sensed a sharp stab that went to the core of his heart. He felt the spilling of his own blood, internal bleeding leaching into his vital organs. He slumped over counsel's table and gasped while Norma took hold of him in a desperate attempt to revive her mentor. Stewart Gooding was buried on a rainy Saturday afternoon with no attendees save for Norma Keeling. She stood at his graveside with her umbrella, terrified for her future. She said her goodbyes and drove home to ponder her fate. She returned to the office on Sunday and began cleaning out Mr. Gooding's personal effects. He had no lineal descendants, and his estate was to be gobbled up by creditors during probate, which left Norma only his office and surrounding land unscathed. It was that Sunday afternoon when she found a singular envelope in the top desk drawer of Mr. Gooding's office, addressed personal and confidential, to one Norma Keeling.